What does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? I am sure that most of you here call yourselves disciples of the Lord. But what does that really mean? I'm here with you today to tell you what it means to be a Christian. If you call yourself a disciple of Jesus, then there is something that He demands of you. And I'm here to tell you what it is that He demands of anyone wanting to be His disciple. And I will accomplish my goal of telling you this great message by sharing with you all one of my many memories with Jesus after having spent more than 3.5 years living and walking and hearing from the Lord. My name is Peter. My friends and relatives know me as Simon, or Simon, son of Jonah, Simon Bar Jonah. Back then, we didn't have any last names. And so that was the only way people could tell which Jonah they were talking about. So I am the son of Jonah. And I grew up in the city of Capernaum. And Capernaum is a city that is located near the Sea of Galilee. And so because of that, you can kind of guess what it is that my father would do for a living. Well, yes, he was a fisherman. And so everything I know about fishing, I owe it to my father. Because as a son, you would grow up working in the trade of your father. If your father was a carpenter, then you would work as a carpenter. If your father was a stonemason, then you would do the same thing. My father was a fisherman, and so I grew up catching fish. And when my father died, my brother Andrew and I inherited our father's fishing business. And so that's all I've done ever since I was little. I remember that I used to spend countless of nights with my brother Andrew fishing because that was the best time to fish at night. And in order not to fall to sleep, we would tell each other stories about the Old Testament, about the great heroes of the faith. But there is something else you should know about me. I wasn't simply a fisherman. I had a fishing business that was greater than anything my father ever dreamed of. I caught, salted, and transported fish to Jerusalem, where James and John, the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder, as Jesus would call them, they were in charge of distributing the fish and selling the fish for profit. Yes, that's right. I knew the sons of Zebedee very well. We grew up together. We used to go to the same synagogue as kids. And my father and their father were good friends. And so I would ask my dad as a child, Dad, is it okay if I go to James and John's house? And I would go over to their house and we would go fishing together because that's all we wanted to do. But not everything was nice about my childhood. Because we grew up under Roman rule. And so it was common for us to see the Romans walking around the city of Capernaum, taxing people on pretty much anything they owned. On how much land they had, on how much fish they caught. But at the same time, we knew that it was better for us to pay our taxes instead of being mistreated by the Romans, because everyone knew what the Romans did whenever they conquered a people. Whenever the Romans occupied a land, they lived off the land, taking its natural resources, enslaving the poor, raping women, and terrorizing the population. And so we paid our taxes. I still To this day, I can still remember my father looking for coins around the house to pay the taxes to the Romans. And so we always paid our taxes when we had to pay our taxes. And in return, the Romans not only allowed us to worship the God of Israel, and they didn't force us to worship any pagan gods, but they also offered to us their protection. And even though we had those benefits from the Romans, deep inside, we were not happy. We were not happy with the fact that Gentiles and that people that had no idea about who God was, they were ruling over our people. And so we dreamed of the days when the Messiah was going to show up, when he was going to appear as a political ruler, as a king, to liberate his people and to free us from the Roman oppression. And so you couldn't walk around in Capernaum without hearing people whispering to one another, I think the Messiah is going to appear very soon. I think he's going to liberate us, and he's going to fight against the Romans, and we're going to become the greatest nation of the earth. Just like in the days of David and Solomon, and he will make Israel the center of the universe. So during my time, people were expecting the Messiah to appear. But they were expecting a kind of Messiah that was going to be fighting against the Romans. And so when I grew up, I was also thinking that during my lifetime, the Son of God, the promised King, that he was going to show up. And I never imagined that I would actually live long enough to see that day become a reality. I'm going to tell you how I met Jesus. One day I was untangling my nets near the Sea of Galilee when I look to my right side and I see that my brother Andrew is running toward me. And he was screaming my name and he was saying, Simon, Simon, we have found him. Wait, slow down. Found who? We have found him, Simon. We found the Messiah. And then he took me to meet Jesus, and my life changed forever. I left everything behind to follow Jesus. I mean, I still had my fishing tools at home, and I still had my wife, and I still had a family that I would provide for. But fishing became secondary. My family became secondary, because if Jesus was really the Messiah, if he really was the fulfillment of the Old Testament, then I wanted to be there when he fought against the Romans. I wanted to be there when he established the kingdom and he liberated our people and he made Israel the greatest nation in the earth. Maybe even get the chance to sit at his right or his left hand when he was reigning from a throne. But I had it all wrong. I had it all wrong, brothers and sisters, because following Jesus was not about fulfilling my dreams or fulfilling my desires. One time, and you can find this in Mark chapter 8 if you want to follow along. If you didn't know this, the Gospel of Mark was written from my memoirs. So I told the story to John Mark, who was my disciple, and everything you find in the Gospel of Mark, it's actually what I told Mark. So just keep that in mind. And the story that I'm going to tell you comes from Mark chapter 8. So behind the Gospel of Mark, I'm actually behind the Gospel of Mark, the Apostle Peter. One time, Jesus, we were by the Sea of Galilee, and all of a sudden he decided to go to Caesarea Philippi, which was about 40 kilometers from where we were. That's a full day's walk. And he didn't tell us anything. He just said, we're going to Gentile territory. And we had no idea why Jesus was doing this. And while we were walking to Caesarea Philippi, which was a center paganism, people worshipped a god that was called the god Pan, which was a god that used to play the flute, and they had a cave for this god in one of near the mountains, near the city, and it didn't make any sense to us why Jesus would take us to such a place. And while we were walking, Jesus asked us, after 3 years of ministry, people have seen my miracles, people have seen my authority over disease, my authority over death, my authority over nature, my authority to forgive sins. They have heard my teaching. I want to know what they say about me. Who do men say that I am? And that question caught us off guard. And so we began to discuss the answers among the 12, and we said, Lord, after 3 years of ministry, some people believe that you are John the Baptist who has risen from the dead. Everyone knew that John the Baptist had been killed by Herod. And so people saw Jesus, and they believed that Jesus was John the Baptist who had risen from the dead, which explained why he had miraculous powers. In other words, people believed that Jesus was the forerunner of the Messiah, that he was not the Messiah. Why? Because Jesus did not fulfill the people's expectations. He did not fulfill the people's expectations. They were expecting a conquering ruler. Remember that episode, as John tells us, where Jesus feeds 5,000 men? The response of the people was, we want to make this man a king. And they wanted to make him king by force, but Jesus ran away. He rejected that. And so people, back then, when they saw Jesus, Jesus was not the kind of Messiah that they were expecting. Even John the Baptist himself, after saying, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, when he saw himself in prison, he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, are you really the one we're waiting for? Because I'm here in jail, the Romans are still ruling over us. Are you really the one that we're waiting for, or are we waiting for another one? So we told Jesus, Lord, some people think that you are John the Baptist. You're not the Messiah. You are the forerunner of the Messiah, but not the Messiah. Other people say that you are Elijah. And I'm sure that you all know that Elijah did not die. He was taken up to heaven. And in the Old Testament it says that before the Messiah showed up, Elijah was going to appear, and he was going to prepare the way for the Messiah. So we told Jesus, Lord, some people believe that you are Elijah, that you are the person who comes before the actual Messiah shows up. And then we told them, and still there's another group of people who believes that you are Jeremiah. And there was a legend among the Jews that said that before the Messiah showed up, Jeremiah, the prophet, was going to appear in the temple, and he was going to have with him the Ark of the Covenant. In other words, we were telling the Lord, after 3 years of ministry, this is what the people think about you. You are not the Messiah. You are the forerunner of the Messiah. And Jesus was looking to the ground. I could see that he was sad. 3 years of hard work, and people did not understand his identity. They didn't know who he was. And so he looked up and he asked the 12, but who do you say that I am? And then we all looked at each other, and I was the leader of the disciples, so I was the spokesperson, so I took a step forward and I looked at Jesus, and without blinking my eyes, I looked straight at him and I said, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are the King that we were waiting for. You are the fulfillment of the Old Testament scriptures. And then Jesus didn't say anything to us. he stayed quiet, and then I thought, and I'm sure that the rest of the disciples thought the same thing. I thought, this is it. He was simply waiting for us to confess him so that he could take arms against the Romans. Now he's going to tell us the instructions about how we are to fight. And he's going to gather up an army, and he's going to overthrow the Romans, and he's going to kick them out of the land, and he's going to make Israel the greatest nation of the earth. He was simply waiting for us to tell him what we thought about him. And then Jesus said, don't tell about this. Don't tell about my identity to anyone. And my dreams were crushed. And I couldn't understand why Jesus didn't want anyone else to know about his identity. And so I was mad, I was angry. And then on top of that, on top of forbidding to us that we told the world that he was the Messiah, he said that the Messiah was going to be rejected, that he was going to be despised by the leaders of Israel, the religious leaders of Israel, the scribes and the Pharisees, and that he was going to be killed, and that after 3 days he was going to rise again. And so as soon as he finished saying that, I grabbed his arm, I took him aside, and I began to rebuke him. What are you saying? You're not supposed to die. You're not supposed to go to the cross. Can't you see that a crucified Messiah is a stumbling block to the Jews? Nobody's going to believe you. The Messiah is supposed to fight, and he's supposed to be a ruler and a king. Why would you say that you have to die? It's going to be madness to the Gentiles if that's the message that you want us to preach. And Jesus just kept staring at the ground. And I thought, I'm starting to convince him. And then he looked at me, and then he said, get away from me, Satan. You are seeing things from a human point of view, not from God's perspective. You are acting the part of Satan. Get away from me, Satan. And then he said this, if anyone wishes to come after me, that person must deny himself, take up his cross, and he must follow me. If you want to be a follower of Jesus, if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, if you want to be a Christian, you have to deny yourself. And you have to take up your cross and follow Jesus. When Jesus says that you have to deny yourself, he means that you no longer rule your life. He means that you die to your dreams, to your desires, and to how it is that you want to live your life. And instead, you allow him to tell you how he wishes you to live your life. That's what it means to deny yourself. You are no longer the ruler of your life. Jesus rules over your life. If you want to be a disciple of Jesus, if you want to be a Christian, that's the price that you have to pay. On top of that, you have to carry your cross. And that doesn't make any sense to you. But back in my day, when we saw a person in Jerusalem carrying a cross, we knew that that person had been condemned to die. Someone who carried a cross was someone who had lost his life. And so, instead of fulfilling your dreams, instead of fulfilling your desires, Jesus offers you a cross. That means, brothers and sisters, that you have to be willing to die, be rejected for his sake, if it were necessary. Your life no longer belongs to you, it belongs to the Lord. If anyone wishes to come after me, that person must deny himself, take up his cross, and that person must follow me. Why? For whoever wishes to save his life. If you wish to save your life by not following Jesus and not denying yourself and not being willing to die for him, if you wish to save your life, If anyone wishes to save his life, that person will lose his life. But whoever loses his life by denying himself, by taking up his cross, whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's, that person will save his life on that day. For what can a man give in exchange for his soul when he's standing before God? Now, this is a very hard message to understand, and it is a very difficult teaching to accept. I understand that. And it could be that some of you reject what it is that I am teaching. I am simply communicating what Jesus said. It could be that some of you are ashamed of the words of Jesus. The Lord says, whoever is ashamed, in that very same passage, He says, whoever is ashamed of me and my words, whoever is not willing to deny himself, take up his cross and follow me, whoever is ashamed of that, then the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when He comes back in the glory of His Father with His holy angels. I know that today we are celebrating Christmas and we are remembering the birth of our Lord, but I understand that some of you have been Christians for a long time, and year after year you have heard about the birth of Jesus. Today I wanted to bring a message that was different, because there are many people today who call themselves Christians, but at the same time have no understanding of what it is that Jesus demands of anyone wanting to follow Him. So I hope that today you have grasped a clearer understanding of what it is that Jesus demands of anyone who calls himself or herself a follower. If you want to follow Jesus, not only do you have to accept what it is that He has done on the cross, but you no longer rule your life. You have to let Him rule over your life. That's what it means to be a Christian. Let us stand together and pray.